as Josh noted,
Sorry
I'll
about that.
talk for about, you're good. I'll talk for about 40 minutes or so and then save the last 20 minutes for Q&A. But if you have clarifying questions, like I can't move on past the slide unless you tell me more about this, just let me know and I can stop and pause on that. So Josh gave you a little bit of background, and I'll get into that in a second, just to give kind of an overview of how I came to think the way that I do, too. But we're talking about customer do data, and that often is a complement to customer say data, and we'll talk a little bit more about that today. I also have a picture of the Experimentation Field Book, which I wrote recently in the last couple of years with these phenomenal co-authors, Jean Licca, who was amazing and a very at the very forefront of design thinking and using it for business. And I share that not as a shameless plug, but more to say a lot of the things that we'll talk about today, there's much deeper dive in the book about them, and also templates and tools. You'll see some of those in there today. So if you are curious and want to learn more, that's part of it too. But you also have a great ecosystem at University of Maryland, the I-Corps program. I got to sit in on some of that, and the customer discovery portion of that dovetails so nicely with this too. So I think you'll find yourself in good company in a lot of different places around the university. So let me jump into our chat today. So this is a little bit about my background. I will not go into any of these. My friend jokingly calls it my NASCAR slide, but these are really different places that have shaped the way that I view the world and the way that I've come to solve problems. And we'll circle back a little bit to that to them in a second. But one of the things I like to draw attention to is sometimes, people show, or you look on LinkedIn, you're like, wow, this person seems like they're checking the right boxes, right? I mean, it felt good to have a job at PwC, and then IBM bought us after college. Like, at least people had heard of this company. I felt like I was getting smarter over time, right? As I was spending time in these places. However, this is more of the graph of what I was feeling, right? As I was entering into my career, right? This sort of level of smartness on the y-axis over time. And you'll see there's an optimal curve where we start tapering off and going back down. And that smartness was a lot of the way that you're taught and trained to be smart and have the right answer in K through 12. And then in college, to some extent, you're kind of getting more into that realm. And I was feeling smarter working at PwC with some really smart people working on interesting things. But it was when I got to my MBA program that I really felt, ooh, okay, this is now I don't feel as smart. What I mean by smart is feeling confident in my decisions on how to spend time and money of my own or of other people's time and money as a leader that I was being, trained to be a leader at business school. And this was around 2009, 2010, right? And it's not to say the world has just sped up in terms of change. But the reason I felt that curve slipping is we're doing cases at business school around Marriott versus Hilton. Okay, you're the CEO of Marriott. What if Hilton opens up this new thing in this new place? What are you going to do about it? Well, I was more worried about, my friend had just visited Chicago and stayed on somebody's couch with a new app called Airbnb, right? That if I was CEO of Marriott, what am I supposed to do, if anything, about that? This world is changing so fast. And I say this is often kind of from a corporate innovation lens, but also as a startup, is how can you feel right and how can you feel smart? And what I found is once my curve tipped, I ran into design thinking and entrepreneurial thinking, and I thought, I don't need to be smart. I don't need to feel like I have the right answer. I need to listen really well to customers, and I need to know how to run an experiment in the market and listen to their due data. And that will help me explore the unknown, right? So what I mean by that is really thinking about where y'all sit a lot in terms of startups is this unknown, right? It may not be new to the world or, sending someone to Neptune. It's just more, it might be new to you and new to who you're trying to serve, or new to the niche of the geography or whatever you're trying to explore. But my point is this design thinking, entrepreneurial thinking sits more in that right-hand side. And that's really what I was drawn to, right? I was drawn to problems in that way and thinking in that way. But that middle section is a lot of where we are taught as K through 12 and also in higher ed institutes. And that will seep in a lot into your thinking, right? And surveys, a lot of say data fall in that bucket. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But recognizing like you're like Batman, you have these little tools in your tool belt and you got to know which ones to pull out at which time, right? And so understanding kind of where you're playing and what space you're in is important too. So three things, it's a little bit about me and kind of why I like talking about this. Three things that I want to chat about today in our brief time together. One is difference between say versus do data. I mean, obviously, that's one of the big reasons you're here. The second is how to run experiments to get that do data. What does that look like to glean that data and track it and measure it? And the third is build like you're right and test like you're wrong. This was actually a University of Maryland engineer graduate who I hired a long time ago who taught me this. And it's a phenomenal, phenomenal description of the entrepreneurial journey in general, and anybody trying to do something new for the first time. And it's very difficult. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means and what that looks like in practice too. So say versus do. Most of y'all are, fairly in the know and can kind of guess kind of what this means from a general standpoint, but let's go over it. There was a client that I had many years ago, Kimberly Clark. This is their professional side of their business. So they're B2B business, and they're selling their products to, public places, hotels, hospitals, schools. They're selling different types of protective equipment and products that help cleanliness, right? So they're doing what a lot of big companies do, a massive survey on germs and cleanliness, asking questions like you see here. Would you eat food that's been contaminated, even if a small amount? No person is going to answer, yes to that question, right? Even though it's like no one's watching them fill it out, you still kind of feel like this is a social contract that's happening with this survey. You're never going to admit to that. However, as we know from being human beings, there's a 5-second rule applies. And unless you're literally at like in a public bathroom and drop a chip on the floor, you're probably going to pick it up and eat it, right? So my point being is what we say on a survey about what we feel about germs and cleanliness might differ dramatically from how we actually behave. And this, what I call the say versus do gap, is insanely human. And we do it all the time, every day. You've probably done it already. I know I have this morning, right? So it's like this is something that is very normal, but we don't often consider it, how to approach it in our work and with our startups. So it really gets down to that bottom section. Like getting that behavioral data of what someone will actually do provides a lot more confidence to us as the startup creators who are trying to get someone to do something new and change their behavior. It might be a teeny tiny change of behavior, it might be a big one, but you're trying to get someone to act differently, to purchase your thing instead of something else, or do something your way instead of the way they've always been doing it. So running an experiment is a cheap way to get due data. Your other option is to build your startup and then keep your fingers crossed and hope that people do what they said they would do on a survey, right? Or a long time ago when you started the startup. Hope is not a great strategy, as I'm sure you've heard that phrase before, right? So experiments help you iterate and test cheaply and quickly as you go. So another example of that is we did work, again, a long time ago at the Mayo Clinic. And sure enough, like a lot of places, they had done surveys. In this case, they're not necessarily a startup, but surveys are ubiquitous. And I'm not here to hate on surveys entirely, but I'm just here to show kind of where they fit and where they don't. But they would do surveys. Obviously, Mayo Clinic at this time was really mostly based in Rochester, Minnesota. This is not an urban area or anywhere kind of too close to one. So one of their biggest things as Mayo Clinic was keeping their physicians there and keeping them happy. And so regularly they did surveys of, are you happy? Do you like your job? What do you like about, what's tough, what's not, right? And so on the survey, they did one of the top pain points, I think it was number 2 for the physicians, was it takes me too long to log in to my patient's records. All right. Okay. Pretty simple. Right. And so IT is like, no problem. This is what I do all day long to do it in my sleep. I will shave off time for the login. Great. So they do this. And the next year, the survey comes out again. And guess what? It's still number 2 as in terms of logging in, is still my top, one of my top 2 priorities of what I do not like and what I would literally like to have changed. And IT is like, oh, I just gave you, 30 more seconds like that. That is a lot. But let me try again. Let me do it again. And they cut even more time off of the login. And as you can tell where the story is going, the third year the survey comes out, it's still on there. It's just now to number 3, but it is still in the top 5 of this is not working out for me. So Mayo's like, okay, got it. Let's try to approach it a different way. And let's start with observing and watching what physicians do instead of taking their word for what their problem is, right? Let's just go and see what's going on. Maybe, maybe we can learn something. They had a new human-centered design innovation group in-house. They were going to try it out. They went out and observed what physicians did and what their physicians did. And sure enough, what they found was the way the rooms were set up when they saw patients. This patient they know has flown probably they don't live, in Rochester, Minnesota. They have flown here for treatment. They've flown into the closest airport. They've driven a couple hours. They've gotten there. They don't want to be there in the first place, right? They're obviously pretty ill. And so they sit down, and the way their room is set up, the doctors have to turn their back to log in to the portal, right? To get the access to their records. So yes, it feels like an eternity of those records, patient records, waiting for those patient records to come up, because your back is turned to the person that you are here to serve, and that this is all you want to do is start getting into the chats with them, right? So this is a very, and so they're like, finally, this makes sense, right? So they prototyped and brainstormed other ways to log in, like maybe logging in before you come in. This all sounds very obvious now because I think it's more of a practice. This is 2007. And so they, try different systems and things that okay, we read your room, or we come in ahead of time, right? And eventually solved the problem and took it off. But it wasn't from the traditional, let me just take the time off. But my point is that surveys can direct us to problems that may not be there, or they may not be seen in a certain way. And so we need to really go out and observe and watch what people actually do in their behavior to understand it, and test the new ideas by also doing the same thing too. So put this in the chat. I've talked a little bit about the say versus do gap. If this is confession time. So if you feel like you're ready to share something that you do, can be personal life or whatever, that is different from what you said you were going to do. I mean, there's some real big buckets here. Recycling, safe choice. Lots of people do that. But go ahead and throw something in the chat if you feel like you can share something. And if y'all are busy, that's okay too. Yes. I sure could. Yeah, studying for the midterm exam. Definitely going to start that super early, telling everybody you're going to start it early. Maybe it's on your calendar, right? But then you actually get around to it a little bit later, right? Mine's like, I don't really need to do, the run, like, right? Get up first thing. Or maybe your New Year's resolution, I'm gonna do a 5K, by April or May, and that doesn't happen. My point is, this is insanely human, and this is really normal to the point where, Haley, I mean, this is just a really part of life. So why do we, do it all the time and yet don't bake it into, yeah, Josh, wow, some good confession you got there. So I appreciate that. It's on record, so hopefully she'll see your confession and get some points on that. Now, one of the things we have to think about with say versus do data is, when do you need it? Sometimes you may not need it, right? So surveys are not bad. They're often really good at the beginning of a process to give us some direction, or kind of help us understand a marketplace or something like that, and give us just some things to work with. And of course, they're good for scale, which is also nice to have maybe at the beginning of a project or at critical moments. This is one of the templates from the book, and it just helps you think about, when might I need more do data versus more say data. So let's look at each of these sliders. And as a team, we often will say, put an X of where you are on the slider at that moment of time in the project too. You'll need do data throughout, right? But it's kind of, when do you need it? So that first row is, are you in a more generative phase at that moment, or more evaluative? Meaning, are you out there kind of looking for, it's tons of possibilities for your solution? Or evaluative, which is more like, I have a startup idea, I'm pretty far into it, right? I want to know really if it's gonna work. Essentially, I want to know if there's product market fit to some extent, right? So that if the X is further on the right-hand side for these, this is typically, we're going to do more do data. Do you have are you working on a beer budget, or are you working on champagne budget? Meaning, like, do you have zero time and money and you just need to do something quick? Surveys are great at that, right? And it's not to say that we need to do some elaborate experiment to get due data, which we'll talk about in a second. But my point is more of, there is a time, champagne, it does take maybe potentially a little more time to do something to get that due data. The willingness to pivot and no major pivots is an interesting one. I mean, if you're still, again, this kind of goes back to the generative. If you're still not totally sure of your solution or what exactly it is that you're building, and you're open to like wildly changing it around, that might be okay to still get that say data as you're still kind of figuring out what the heck it is. But if you're really moving along further downstream and you really want to focus on like getting that idea right, like getting the general sense of your idea more accurate, then due data is really helpful for that. And the last one is, maybe you're doing a startup that is pretty easy for people to adopt, right? That could be, it's usually a feature change that's already in an app, but if there's something that's just a teeny change to somebody's already existing flows in their day, maybe say you can get away with some say data, but most of us are not. And that's when, if we're creating something new and it requires some behavior change, that due data is going to really help us out too. So that's a little bit about some of the differences between say and do. I don't see any big questions yet, but keep them coming. So next is how do you run experiments to get that due data, right? And again, you don't need a champagne budget, even though I had it on the spectrum. One of the other things to think about, and these are kind of getting more in like the mindset of due data versus say data, is just backing up a little bit, right? When you're doing a startup, typically, whether you say it out loud or not, you're weighing the X and Y axis in this graph. You're thinking about the risk of this thing working or not, and the time and the money that you're putting against it. And imagine, as you scale, you're still thinking the same thing, right? Of what if I'm making something new, no one wants to spend time and money on something that has a lot of risk in it, right? So your job essentially as an entrepreneur is to de-risk that thing so that you feel like you can go confidently ask for money or use your own money, right, to invest in it too. So these are some bad curves down this road. And I'd say though, the middle one that starts in development is usually the one that we see the most, right? People just love to build stuff and they feel like when they sit too long in research, it's paralysis analysis. I'm not actually doing anything. I really like developing something, like I'm building my app, building this platform, you're getting it off the ground, right? And you look how much risk you're still leaving on the table and as your investment is already further down. So what we're trying to do is smooth out that curve, right? Taking these baby steps of testing and experimenting down these sort of lily pads, if you will, into by the time you're really getting ready for that scale, you have de-risked this thing, right? And this is how VCs are going to be viewing you anyway. If you're asking other people for money, this is what they're looking for too. So this isn't some earth-shattering concept. But that testing in the market is really where that due data you first get in the mix with it. And that can really squeeze a lot of risk out of it too, which is what we're here to do. And it really is around what are you building, right? At the beginning, you're like, why am I building this? What's the problem I'm solving? Why is this important to anyone? And then later you get into how. And how's really fun too, because there's so many tools for it and you already quote unquote know what you're building. But that what to build is really where that due data comes in. Because customers can give you some feedback that can really shape very much so in minor ways and big ways what it is that you're offering. So the steps to experimentation, they're really pretty simple and they follow, as you probably already guessing or sensing, the scientific method, right? So these 5 steps are first, you're figuring out what you're testing. You're framing your idea and you're setting like, what data do I need to either validate or invalidate some pieces of my idea that I think are kind of sus, as the kids say, right? And then this middle section, the steps 3 and 4 is really how are you going to test? What's your test? What's your prototype? And then the 5th is running the test. And you'll see all these little dotted arrows at the beginning. You'll run multiple tests. This isn't a one-time, de-risk everything, get your due data, move on. This is really this iterative process, depending on what it is that you're trying to learn too. So why experiment, right? This is something I've been kind of circulating around, but let's nail it down. One, it protects you from overspending. I mean, really. And I know a lot of y'all, if it is, bootstrapped or, you want to make sure you're spending things at the right time in the right way. I don't need to tell you more about that. The other thing is to test more of a portfolio of ideas. If you have like a couple of different ways that your startup can come to life, like couple different business models, you're not quite sure which one, this is perfect for that, right? To kind of nailing in what it is too. It helps you set up for scale because it helps you play with a couple like assumptions or things that could go wrong that could really mess up scale later. So you're kind of tweaking those early and understanding it. And then you have more time to talk to your early adopters and really get that relationship going with them and getting their due data from those early adopters. So here is an example of an experiment. So going through those 5 steps. And this is with Nike, but we helped build a startup that ended up getting absorbed into Nike. So Nike was sort of giving us some direction or a problem they wanted solved, but we wanted to not launch it as a Nike thing, but first just test, again, get due data that's not false because it has a Nike brand with it. And then later, a year and a half later, after running a bunch of tests, we put the Nike brand on it. So first it was called Easy Kicks. The problem Nike was thinking about is how can we create a better shoe purchasing experience for 8 to 12-year-olds. Now this was 2012, 13, before people started buying more online. So keep that in mind because I think buying shoes online is a little more normal now. But we're talking about a subscription service for 8 to 12-year-olds that you're buying them online. So the first thing we sit down, what in the world, what is this thing, right? And you saw the idea, the challenge statement that they thought, and they turned it into a concept snapshot. There's a million of these types of things out there, like your one pager, you can call it a business plan, but it's your 30-second pitch, just what the heck is this thing? And really following in these rows of a typical value prop. Who's it for? What do they want? How does it meet their need? What makes it different? So and you don't have to read all this too, but Nike essentially is saying parents don't want to they don't want to spend their Saturday trying to find shoes at the store that fit with kids, particularly multiple kids if they have them, right? They would love to make this more time effective, more convenient, that kind of thing. Kids in this age group particularly want a little more agency. They want a little more control. They're trying to find the right fit, but they also want to look cool. And so you've got these things, and this, what they're offering, that middle row is a shoe subscription service where you get these new shoes regularly, because this is also, they're growing to their shoes like hotcakes at this point. And then you send the old shoes back. That was a really important piece for Nike. They were not sure if people were going to actually do the sending of the shoe back. And you'll see that that is going to be our experiment that we run. But that was really important for them because they lean a lot on sustainability, and they had already spent a ton of money on a huge, kind of machine and operating equipment to recycle old shoes and turn them into basketball courts and tennis courts. They really wanted to use that, right? And then these are ways that it was benefits and unique. But one of the things that they were least confident in, this is how they're defining their evidence, is will people return their shoes? So your assumption is, as an entrepreneur, and when you do your startup, you are making wild amounts of assumptions or things you don't know for certain because it hasn't been launched yet about what people will do and what will happen, right? Your business plan, huge assumption. Every little piece of it is theory. It is not into reality yet, right? And so your job is to take these assumptions and get evidence to prove or disprove them, just like a scientist in a lab is going to prove or disprove a hypothesis, right? In this case, your biggest thing you want to learn in this lab or this experiment is, will people return their shoes? This is a classic say versus do gap of sustainability. Like, yeah, I'm going to recycle that. And then you find it in the trash can, right? And you have a million signs around every trash can that's like trying to remind you what is recyclable or not, right? All these different things to kind of close that say do gap. That's what they wanted to learn. Then the evidence they were trying to collect was, what's a percent of people who return their old shoes? If we run an experiment and get people to return them, what percentage will do that? Your threshold is trying to say, what's meaningful here? Like, do I need this to be 90? I'm okay with it being 30. And it might depend on where you are in your test. If it's an earlier test and you just need to get some quick data, you might be okay with lower. But this is just to help you think through, what am I trying to hit to some extent? So in this case, they were saying, you know what? If 60% of people return their shoes in this experiment, that'll give us some good enough due data to keep on this direction, right? And so with the source is what we'll talk about in a little bit. But what we did was we got a prepaid envelope and had people return their shoes. But I'm going to explain that in a second. So now we're selecting your test and we're going to build a prototype. So the test is, what is my test to run that I can get that data that I just decided I wanted to get, that I needed, that due data that I need to prove or disprove that that I'm on the right path. In the book, we talk about 5 different test types for the selecting a test. There are tons of test types, but we try to keep it really simple if the testing is kind of a new or experiment. But as startup entrepreneurs, y'all probably know many more, and there's lots out there. Here's some common ones. I'm going to go through them real quick. Cognitive walkthrough is when you're co-creating with someone. This woman, we're working with her on an AARP project around caregiving. Again, what's cheaper? Not much is cheaper than paper at this point. So we're printing out sort of very low fidelity prototypes of her journey through this service and what it would feel like. And then she's using these little like kind of poker chips to tell us what she likes and doesn't. And she's going to then add in what she wants. Like, she's going to get the pen and start writing, actually, at this point, I want to be doing this. This is still a little bit in the say zone, but it's a very, very cheap, easy way to get that data where you're inviting someone in, you're saying, what would you do with that? Which is different, and one step away from a survey, which is good. Lemonade stands are pop-ups, and these are things where you can give people things to interact with. There's different fidelity types, and there's some due data that you can do at a lemonade stand and some say data you can get. Smoke test are ones. A/B tests are very common ones, right? These are things you're kind of doing behind the scenes that people may not realize is a test. So for this Nike experiment, for example, we were trying to figure out what was the main benefit statement. As you saw, there's lots of benefits to parents of not wanting to spend their Saturday at Dick's Sporting Goods with all their kids. But this is trying to say, what are the main thing? Is it sustainability? Is it saving time? Whatever. So we ran a split test on different AdWords, right? And you're getting that due data of, are people clicking on it or not? And then you get to the next button, you can leave a little breadcrumb of actions they take, clicking, emailing, signing up. That's all due data to show how much of a need is this, right? How much is this? Are they really curious about this? Simulation and trials are a little bit more, take a little more time to do as test and come a little bit later typically. But the simulations where something looks as, as light touch as it can, and it works enough on the front end, but the back end might be still manual. And then trials are getting a little more formal. Lemonade stand is where we went in this case to collect that return data, and I'll show you how. And then what prototypes do you need? What kind of stimulus do you need to have this conversation? In this case, we chose mock-ups, but here's some other ones that you might use. Storyboards, again, great for co-creation. They match up well with that. Inviting people in, having them have a blank page of their storyboard. What would you put in here? What's your challenge, right? This is some great ways to get more generative ideas early on. Posters are great things for the lemonade stand, and they can have some say and due data in them. Pitch decks are great. You're pretending somebody else thinks this is a sales pitch, but you think it's a research. It's time to get research. People will definitely show their true colors in a sales meeting. They might have said 1,000 times they would buy it, but when they never email you back after you have some really good calls to action at the end of a sales meeting or in your follow-up, there's your due data, right? The people don't care. They're going to tell you what they want to tell you to your face, and then not with their behavior. And then mock-ups, I mean, those are great places to get some digital presence to see if someone will engage and sign up and click and do some due data in it. And then MVPs are also good for that. So we went with the mock-up, and here is the mock-up. Again, with this startup, we decided not to build out the entire startup, but rather just build a test for this one component of the startup, which I think is particularly handy when you're building a service that someone's going to engage with over time, like a subscription. So this is my colleague, Mike, who doesn't work for Nike, but in this case, we went to a Nike store. He put on a pullover, and we handed people who are just buying regular old shoes, not part of this subscription service, just regular shoes. We handed them a prepaid envelope and said, hey, send us back your old shoes when you get home. And on the side, it said, why are you sending it back? Are you trying to declutter your house? Do you love the environment? Something blank and probably something else. And we sent it back, and then we waited for that due data to come back. And this was the test that we were running. We ran it and we waited. And sometimes people send it back 200 days later. People shoved all kinds of other shoes down in there too to let us know what they were, to say, yes, this is a need. I'm sending you a bunch of them. And the long story short is the due data we got of, will people send it back? Yes, but they will send it back much later. And what we also found is that in general, the saving the environment piece was not the lead reason that people were going to send us back, which is good because we were going to lean into that more, and we decided not to, right? This was just a feature in the background that we thought once they were in for other reasons, then they would do this. So that was really good due data to let us know that. So just wanted to walk you through what that looks like in real life, particularly a component test, because I think that typically people think they need to build the whole thing and then come in and say, oh, I'm just, now I need to test the whole thing. You can test little parts as you go. Okay, so one of my favorite Maryland alumni, David Lemus, taught me this statement when I hired him a long time ago, and it's amazing, right? But the thought is that this is a really tough mindset shift as an entrepreneur. And a lot of times you're convincing yourself this is right, and it's right to spend the time and money on that you have on this. And you're trying to constantly pitch to investors and pitch to other people why this is so great, right? And so that mindset of like, I'm trying to build this like I am right, but then I need to put on my hat, like my worry wart Debbie Downer hat, and test it like this is all going to crumble down. And I need to really understand what is the one thing that could go wrong that I think is like the most likely to go wrong, and then test that piece too. This is a little bit we were just talking about of like breaking down some of the terminology, right? The hypothesis is the concept you want to test, the larger thing that you think this is your business plan, right? Like this is going to go in this way, and people are going to do X, Y, Z, and it's going to be phenomenal. Your assumption is your belief about why that is a good idea, and that's what you want to test. So for Nike, their assumption was people will return their shoes. It's a big assumption they're making. It's based on some good evidence, right? But we don't know. And the evidence is accountable phenomenon or data that you're going to validate or refute your assumption, right? And that data can be quantitative, it can be qualitative, it depends on what you're trying to prove and what you need to prove it, right? And at what stage you're in. A lot of times when we're talking as a team or a startup leader about assumptions, this is we're not supposed to use the word Mad Lib, but I mean, we all did Mad Libs when we were younger, right? This is a fill in the blank. It might help you think through your assumption if you're trying to kind of understand it. And the book has a lot more information on how to surface assumptions, but it's essentially like, what would you, if you went and pitched this to a VC and they were like, I'm not giving you any money until you show me X, that is your assumption to test, right? And if you can get a friend or somebody to tell you that honestly, that's a great thing too. But it also can be what's keeping you up at night about this. Let me pause for a second and see if you are basically still listening. It's okay if you're not, but if you are, I would love for you to write down in the chat, what do you think is happening in this photo? And I promise this is going to relate back to what we're talking about. Just what's happening in this photo? What do you see? What's happening? And I'm looking over to the side to see if anybody's. Okay, we got sorting returned shoes sorting. Oh, lost keys, Dave. Oh, Dave, I didn't realize you were here. I got a cold call on you. Some lost your shoes. Yep. Sorting shoes, checking the things out. Trying to find a matching shoe. These are all phenomenal guesses. But one of the things that we often as humans do, overflow the seconds, yeah, is we are trained in K through 12 and beyond to immediately apply a meaning or interpretation to what we're observing with our senses. And that is what that's what many of y'all did, and it's what I did the first time I did this exercise. What's really happening, what I can observe with my 5 senses in this photo is there are brown and black shoes. They seem to be on the floor. These seem to be 2 men crouching down next to them, right? There's a mirror in the background, right? If I was in person, maybe I could smell something or, sense something else. But the observations in here is what I need to sit with as an entrepreneur, right? And that's with our customers. It's just how can I release what I think is happening, and release that notion of the interpretation of, oh, definitely there's an earthquake, definitely we're sorting shoes. We're applying our level of meaning to something, and that's very hard to do. So when we're collecting that due data, a lot of times what we're trying to do is suspend our interpretation of the due data. Oh, well, they probably didn't return their shoes because they didn't like the envelope that we gave them to return their shoe back, right? Or, maybe because we picked the wrong store to do the experiment, and that's probably why, and so I think we have a natural, totally normal tendency as people to layer our own interpretations of the data. So staying true to what you're hearing and seeing in the due data can be difficult at times too, right? This is just people randomly on the shoes, but imagine if this was a picture or data that was showing your startup concept. It's hard not to see what you want to see in it to some extent. Okay, we're nearing the end. This is probably more of maybe like a 201 slide. But earlier I was like, oh, there's just a few tests you can do. There's actually a lot of different tests you can do. And those bubbles on the yellow side are really kind of different ways to think about different types of testing. You heard me earlier, if you look at that y-axis of end-to-end test versus component. That Nike example I gave you happened to be a component test where you picked out one spot versus an end-to-end where you really need to have outlined more of a journey. And then that say versus do. So this is sort of like a diagram of different types of tools that we use to get customer insight and where they sit on that quadrant too, right? And thinking through, okay, where am I? What do I need in these different quadrants? And to that left-hand graph, you really want to, the little guy on the side, this is where you really want to start trying to move, start in that bottom quadrant, but then sort of move up to that do test. And as you go, using some of those component tests before you have to build out the whole end to end too. Okay, recap, and then we're about to do some Q&A. So you want to start with say data, but move into do data and use that say data sparingly and accurately throughout that time too. And oftentimes this is mixed methods. So you could do them at the same time. You could do a survey, but also be doing some due data simultaneously just to gut check it. The second one is experiments are a great way to kind of help you better spend your time and money, put really simply. And then lastly, don't skip assumptions. Be honest with yourself about what you really think might could go wrong, and then test it, right? You don't have to be right. But you want to make sure that you're spending your time and money thinking about like the top assumption or the top two assumptions that can really kind of, like somebody described assumptions, like if you make a house of cards, it's that bottom card that you're going to pull out that the rest will collapse. Don't pull the top card out because it's easy to test. Go for the jugular at the bottom too. And then the last reflection question for you before we get into others, like, does anybody want to share, like, as they're listening to this, is there anything in your startup or your life that you're like, you think could have used an experiment or experiment could have helped with it? If y'all want to reflect on that a little bit, and then we'll open it to Q&A. And I'm looking at the chat. Yeah. Kasha, do you think you could run an experiment to answer that question? My eyes go to users are dissatisfied. Are they? What due data can you find to understand that more, what that means too? Oh, good. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Interviews are a great kind of inching towards that due data, particularly if you get people, if you can't actually do experiments, and this is what y'all talked about in iCore, getting people to tell a story about what they've done in the past, is capturing that due data. It's due data from the past, but that's pretty good representation of what they might do in the future. Awesome. Any other questions? I'm opening it up to folks now. And if you want to learn more about the book, that's the QR code to it. But what else is on your mind? What in this are you curious to learn more about, or have you tried this before at all?
I see, and I'm happy to
Oh,
bring
Amrita, yeah.
people, yeah, bring people off of mute. So let me do,
Okay.
Adam, you put a question in the chat. I'm going to bring you off of mute, and you can verbalize that and kind of
Yeah.
chat back and forth here. And then Amrita, I see you've got next, so I can do that. But go ahead, Adam. You should be able to talk now if you want.
Yeah.
Thanks, Josh. Hey, Natalie, great presentation.
Thanks.
Um, I'm curious about how developers interact with like non-biased
Mhm.
testers. I guess that would be kind of your focus group sort of cohort.
Yeah.
Certainly friends and family can do it.
Mhm.
Like I'm always like, it's not like I'm distrustful, but
Mhm.
the incentives are just not necessarily aligned with how they might respond. I'm curious, like how you might get a group of like 100 potential users that could go through a beta version of like a SaaS-based beta product and have them say like, we hate this part about it, and we hate
Mhm.
this part about it more, or we really like this part. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't matter necessarily.
Mhm.
We can take it. It is actually really valuable to learn when people say they hate something. So
Yeah.
how
Yeah,
how do you
definitely.
how do you find like willing enthusiasts that do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, recruiting. Like we could have a whole probably webinar on recruiting and how to do that and how to have multiple plans for recruiting. You're right. I mean, the friends and family can be really detrimental if not done right. And to be totally honest, it was interesting because Nike would do a lot of testing with friends and family, and it gets them so many false positives. The service they ran before we launched this one, they said lost $49 million. They built it, and no one came. And that will happen sometimes, especially because the friends and family want to, if you and Josh and I were talking about the mom test, right? If you ask the question in a certain way, people give you the answer they want, particularly if they know you and like you. So this recruiting can be something, I mean, you can do a variety of things. I mean, you can go the classic route of literally like going to userinterviews.com and and signing people up and paying them for their time, which is very normal and very typical to do that. You can also go to a professional association potentially and say, hey, I'm looking for for people to sign up and tell me what they're, or you can kind of post it to some general internet, where it's not people you hang out with, but you could say, hey, come, I'm doing this live simulation at this time. I want you to come. So there's some ways to recruit different batches, potentially groups that are already there, you can form them. Oh, thanks, Josh, for that. And then the other thing is kind of how do you set up the interview, right? So something up front to say, I mean, a couple of ways you can kind of do it to make sure you're getting what setting it up front and signaling in some ways that you are excited to get negative feedback, right? And that often is indicated by saying that directly or sharing a time as this, like, oh my gosh, I heard this feedback and it really helped, or with the earlier version of this product. So we're really looking for that, just being really open about it. And also some other things to help with people giving feedback is showing them options. People are much more likely to say what they don't like if you show them 2 or 3 options, because then they'll drop that kind of social contract of telling you this is working. They'll tell you which of the 3 of these sucks or is good or whatnot too, is another way to set it up. And during the oftentimes what I see sometimes in interviews is, especially if you're kind of watching someone use a prototype, is so you're standing over their shoulder explaining it to them. In any good research, you should be talking maybe 5% of the time at most, right? So someone has a question, you're not answering it. You're saying, what do you think it should be? What do you, and that's some good mom test, and I-Core kind of went over that as well. But I think setting up it to be, or even ways like we've done things where you put emojis on things you do or don't like, and that gives you like it's a softer way than being like, this sucks verbally, right? You can find different ways to kind of let people go in. Sorry, Adam, you obviously hit like something I'm really excited about, but those are some different things that come to mind, but I'll pause just to see other questions.
That's great. Thanks, Natalie. Really appreciate it.
Okay, Amrita, you should be able to talk now if you want to come off mute and share.
I just wanted to say it was a great session. I I learned a lot. My business is primarily around service. So
Mhm.
when I do a networking session and I say these are the services that I would provide, everyone is like, "Wow, that's great, that's exciting." But people actually don't sign up because they're like, "I'm not really paying for, let's say, all the getting my CV done or resume or networking or LinkedIn," because
Yeah.
those kind of things are available. But in biotech, they are pretty niche, so you may not find all the information. So, I just wanted to thank you for a great session, and I learned a lot, but I wasn't sure what were the takeaways for like people who are training providers or service providers.
Yeah, that's a big one, and a lot of the work that we used to do was around services specifically. And I think that what's particularly like it sounds like maybe this potential service is around career services type support. Um, a lot of folks who are B2B services providers, I mean, the LinkedIn and other digital ways are a great way to explore what's resonating or what's not resonating, right? What people are clicking on to engage with of content that you're making. Like I have a friend who runs prototypes all the time on his services business to understand what is the ones that's hitting and not. Like he has 2 or 3 services he offers, and he's constantly running sort of digital prototypes to put different things out there to see what people engage with, or even names of different things. Like you could have 3 different versions of your website that people can come to, or and you might call things different, or you might look at some different benefit statements, or you might try some different kind of like in the Nike, it was like, what's the main pain point that you're trying to solve, right? And kind of try those 3 different taglines out for cold emails and see which ones people respond to. And by respond, I mean putting HubSpot behind it and seeing like what people open, where they click, what they do, do they reply, what do they reply back to? So I think kind of thinking, a lot of times I don't think people are always considering some of the general marketing that they do is an experiment, is due date, and setting up that in that way so that you can kind of split test different things against each other. But earlier on, if you don't have a website or that kind of thing yet, is in services in particular, is to ask people to go through the journey of buying another service already and what made them kind of step over that edge. So those co-creation interviews sounds like kind of more of a B2B service are really critical, and particularly all the different influencers versus decision maker, and getting all those different perspectives in the room too for services. Because with services, it's usually many people involved in the purchase.
Thank you.
All right, I think Kaushik wanted to talk. Kaushik, you should be able to come off mute now with your question.
Yeah, Thanks, Josh, and thanks, Natalie, for the wonderful presentation. So, coming to my question, so I did use Mom Test for interviewing potential
Yeah.
customers, uh, uh, but I was looking for something, like online or digital repositories where I can get some reviews on products that people use. So, do you have any suggestions or any frameworks for me?
Yeah, you're just trying to get a general pulse of what people use currently, like their status quo choices that they're making, you mean?
Basically, I'm looking for like a gap between or a white space between products uh, where I could, improvise on my, my project. So basically, I'm looking for customer pain points.
Oh, you're at the early stage of pain
Yeah,
point.
very early
Oh,
stage.
yeah. I mean, some easy things. I see a lot of people on LinkedIn of like, hey, what if you work in this particular role, what are the top three things on your mind? I mean, I think at that early stage, you're trying to probably triangulate first, steal stuff that people have already written, go find market research that people have already done and run that through AI to get you some theme, multiple ones, then complement that with data out in the field, right? For different, and if you are trying to sell to a particular role or you're even in a particular arena, get multiple, this is when you're kind of more just trying to figure out, oh, if I'm going after this particular place, is it a small company or a little company? Is it in this sector or in that sector? That's pretty broad, in which case, talking to lots of customers, you're going to want to do that sparingly because you just can't get that many folks. So that's a good time to use a mixed method research, I think. But, even going to, sometimes even setting up a table at an industry conference, if you have a particular industry or focus point, is a good place to kind of get a lot of pain points quickly. But also digitally going in certain forums and LinkedIn groups. Is that helpful? Or have you
Yeah.
done that? Okay.
So I did rely on AI. Yeah, so I did that, and yeah, I think the framework was pretty useful, like in your case. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, got that.
If you've got other questions, feel free again to throw those in the chat. Let me know. I can have you come off mute. I'll ask one question here while we collect the last batch. So, Natalie, you kind of shared your experience working with Nike, and obviously Nike is Nike, right? You have huge built-in customer base, a lot of resources. Are there any kind of key differences if we're talking about working with a startup where you may not even have a customer base yet? Your resources are pretty strapped. What are kind of the differences in doing an experiment with an existing company versus with somebody that is completely coming in with a brand new product?
Yeah, and in this case with Nike, that actually was we made this as a startup too. We did not use any of their customers or any of their resources to get this off the ground. I mean, other than a shoe, once, somebody was thinking about it. But I think for them, the things that typically would make a corporate successful hurt them. And so that's why they went this route I mean, it even hurt them. Like, we made $300 in the alpha test and Nike doesn't even know where to put it. We had to make a separate LLC for them to collect the $300 from their alpha test, right? So it actually created a lot more work to do this service as a complete startup outside of Nike. And then, like I said, 2 years later, they put the Nike brand on it, and of course, it would do even better. But they wanted to get the value of it without it. So none of this was done with any of the Nike resources. And I think even if we hadn't had a Nike store, we would have just potentially asked some other random shoe store, can we come in and do prepaid envelopes and we get the stinky shoes back? People would have been probably fine. Some store would have been fine with that too. So I don't know if I mean, that's why I picked that example, because it was more of a pure startup. They knew enough. The one thing I think from Advantage is they knew enough about the pain point. And this is kind of Tikashuk's point. They knew enough about the pain point of their customer. However, you look at that and you're like, you could go talk to any parent and be like, I do not like shopping with my kid for shoes. Like, it's a pretty obvious pain point. But I think start with something that right, really well, and you're comfortable deeply understanding that pain point too. But I think they didn't have, if anything, they had, like I said, they had more people rooting against them because they were taking up resources in a portfolio that some other project, would have gotten instead too. So there's still that competition, but I think the experiments still run the same either way. They're meant to be more from a startup perspective. So things would still, I mean, that particular experiment could have easily been done without a Nike. You would have just had to ask to be more of a store. So in this case, that was probably, they were more of a disadvantage, but the book and the approach is more of for startups than it is for corporations to some extent, because they can't, it's too hard for them to even see, even take off their own lens. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
Mhm.
Well, it looks like we haven't had any more questions come in.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to thank you for going over that for us and again, engaging with a couple different folks on specific questions. Yeah, and we've got the experimentation field book here. If you have further questions, like I said, this webinar will be recorded and available to everybody to watch on their own time later. But just Natalie, wanted to thank you for your time today. If there's any closing thoughts you want to share, go for it.
Yeah, no, I just encourage people to talk more to their customers. I'm sure you hear that all the time from the different parts of the university, and to really focus on. I know it's easy and comfortable to do a survey and to get those results, but I think getting out and really trying to get those due data tests. And I'd say don't seek perfection. I think a lot of times people are like, oh, I need to run some big elaborate test. But it can just be something simple. Like I said, even paying attention to the metrics of your email traffic or text you send out, who's being realistic about who's really engaging with me and who's being, who am I really creating value for that? And then switching it up and trying something if it doesn't work, too. But I think even the smallest experiment or the tiniest change and getting that due data can go a long way. So don't beat yourself up if you don't feel like you have tons of time and money to run an experiment. Just try something a little bit different.
Great. Well, thank you, Natalie, and thanks everybody. We appreciate everybody's time and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.
Yeah. And happy startupping for all of you
That's
out
right.
out in that hard world. And thanks for having me. Have a good rest of your day.